I just wanted to say a little bit of an introduction about Lazor. Lazor is someone that I've known for a very long time. In many areas, maybe even all areas, I believe that there's a lot of humility, and I wanted to explain exactly to what extent this is. You know, a lot of Gedolim, there's plenty of Gedolim here in America, plenty of famous names of Yaakov Kamenetsky or Moshe Feinstein, and we also have the Novominsker of Yaakov Perlow. I believe some people pronounce it Perlow, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. He sadly passed away during COVID. But because I was friends with Lazor Perlow, and I never heard from him about this yichus, and we're going to hear that he has yichus not just on his father's side, but even on his mother's side. Like you would think it would be just the opposite. If you're friends with someone who has such yichus, you would hear about that person more than anyone else. Another point I wanted to say is that he's an excellent journalist. He's very good at taking an experience which is really larger almost than something that could be put into words, and he puts it into just the right words. Not just that, he's very good at touching up a situation. He's perceptive of people. To be a good journalist, you have to have those midos that is spoken about in the Mishnah Pirkei Avos, the 48 ways to be kaina Torah. We're going to end off here with a bracha as well, even though it's a brachas hadyon, and but nonetheless, a bracha is a bracha. The bracha is that all of these wonderful midos that he has, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu give him the siyata d'shmaya, and to be able to use it for the good, to be to make this world a more compassionate place, more grace, chen chesed v'rachamim. And now we're going to hear from him, so stay tuned. For the very first time, we have here Lazor Perlow. He is a great nephew to the Novominsker. We start off the episode this evening or this afternoon with a focus on the Novominsker. As you see, we are going to move that focus to other people, especially at the end. But for right now, let's keep it on the Novominsker. And this is a very exciting moment because we've never had him on the episode. And I invite everyone to listen, please.
My name is Lazor Perlow. My father's younger brother was the late Novominsker Rebbe Zatzal. His two youngest kids are twins. His two oldest sons, rather, I should say, are twins, and they both share the mantle of being the current Novominsker Rebbe's. I didn't know the Novominsker as personally well as I feel I should have. I feel like there definitely were missed opportunities for me to develop closeness to him, which I didn't merit to develop. I would occasionally call him when I had major life decisions lying in front of me, like whether to go to Yeshiva A or Yeshiva B. And if I'm going to Yeshiva A or B, and they have several different chaburas, should I go to a chabura that's focused more on learning Bekias or learning more Be'in? So I held him in incredibly high esteem. And from people that I know that have been students of his, it's clear to me the amazing impact that he had on them. And obviously, with a wider aperture, the impact he had on all the Jewish people, whether directly or indirectly, by virtue of his culminating position of leading the Agudas Yisrael of America, which is, I would say, a shadow of itself since his passing.
So that's pretty amazing. Because what I hear you saying is that you wish you had more of a kesher with him. You feel like you didn't really have that much of a kesher with him. But at the same time, you mentioned several times that you called him and you really got hadracha from him. And I'll tell you one other thing is that I remember, and I don't remember where I was, but I remember running into him and he said, "Send regards to Lazor Perlow." Do you remember that happening or not?
I do not. That's pretty amazing.
Growing up, my father used to always say, "You know the difference between an Aguda rabbi and a young Israel rabbi." My father used to say that you'll never hear in a good rabbi say the word existentialist. You'll never hear it done. But young Israel rabbi, you will always hear it. And sure enough, every time you go to Young Israel in St. Louis, Rabbi Bienenfeld, you'll always hear it. At the, Rabbi Greenblatt, you'll never hear it. But then one time, my father and I, we were at a convention. It was here in Chicago. The Novominsker was there, and he was speaking. And I was sitting next to my father, and he said the word existential. And I looked at my father, and like, my father's just been slugged up, basically. Like, so he said to me, he said, no, no, it's because he graduated college. So like so it turned into not an Aguda versus Young Israel. It's now the difference is did he graduate college or did he not or something in between. I thought that
Yeah,
was
I would say something that dovetails with that is that the Novominsker really transcended categorization, and someone like Rai Bienenfeld, who you indirectly referenced as the previous rabbi of the Young Israel in St. Louis, was a close student of Rav Yasher Bar Soloveitchik of blessed memory, who himself was very much familiar with the world of existentialist philosophy. And as it turns out, the Novominsker had a certain closeness. I don't know how close, but he definitely would consult with Rav Yasher when Rav Yasher was living with halacha questions and possibly hashkafic ones as well.
and one of the questions that I wonder is having the Novominsker as a relative to you, has that in some ways maybe made life harder for you?
Well, it certainly lends itself to a sense of something akin to perhaps a rabbi's son syndrome, or a sense of uh, there's an idea in Chassidus that Chassidish rebbes are like kings. There's a malchus appended to being an aspect of malchus appended to being a Chassidish rebbe, and coming from a Rebbeisha family, but not really identifying with the Rebbeisha part of it, and possibly lend itself to feeling like a quote unquote monarch in exile. Like uh, to paint myself as someone that has anything to do with godless or malchus or anything like that, but a shade of perhaps what one may feel, if they are the king of Algeria and then the French colonialists take over and send the king into exile. I've had a cousin or two that feel this way, that have used that term about their own experience coming from Rebbeisha families. But no, he was, in my interactions with him, which are limited, he was I would say on the whole uplifting. When he came to my brother's bar mitzvah, this is my brother David. So he's now pretty much 40 years old. So we're talking 27 years ago. He sought me out. I was a little bit shy. I was definitely shy and intimidated by the charisma and gravitas that the Rebbe had, and I didn't go over to him, and he sought me out, and he said, and I was in ninth grade at Ner Yisrael at the time, and he said, I spoke to Rabbi Neuberger, the late Rav Herman Neuberger, recently, and he told me how well you're doing in your shir in ninth grade, and I encourage you to keep it going and keep up the good work. And um, he was always very pleasant, and always I would say tried to uplift me. So on the
Wow.
whole,
Wow, I didn't know that. So he came to Baltimore. He asked Rabbi Newberger how you're doing. You were in Rabbi Eiskraut's share, I believe.
that's correct, yeah. And he had spoken to our Neuberger on the phone maybe days before about a Moetzis related question. And Agav Orcha, like, by the way, either Rabbi Neuberger or my uncle had mentioned my name, and Rabbi Neuberger said, we really like him. And my uncle was very encouraging when he related that anecdote to me, and I was left kind of spellbound. And I was left thinking, oh, like, why was I so intimidated? I should have gone over to him right away to seek out his thoughts. But I would also say that I was always had like an independent streak in terms of how I thought about things. And unless it was like a very pivotal question of which yeshiva should I go to, or should I, like a milestone life decision, I was never really the type of person to seek out Eitzah, and that could be to my detriment.
When going back to ninth grade, so who told you about that conversation? It was Rabbi Newberger,
My great uncle.
the
I
number.
had I had nothing to do with Ray Newberger. Like, to me, Ray Newberger was a very distant figure. He
Right.
didn't, yeah.
Yeah, so he told you that he heard very good things.
Correct. Obviously, it's a small study sample. I was only a few months into ninth grade, so it's not a lot to
Right.
go by. But it was very encouraging for him to have said it to me.
Encouraging indeed. That's a very impressive story. I didn't realize that he really took so much of an interest in you. You know, granted, you are family, but I would imagine that there's a lot of family, and that's something really special. There's something else that you mentioned, and you said that you're not really the type to go and seek Eitzah from people, but I know from your past that you come from a family that, at least it seems like, at least on your mother's side, seems like she did use this mahalach earlier in your life and even later in your life, but perhaps we need more clarity on that. So one example I remember is something. I remember it because it's a little bit intense, is that, a lot of people, we make decisions of what school to go to or what yeshiva to go to. We ask Das Torah, but in your case, it was, even for summer camp, a lot of the students were going to the camp, but your mother was insistent that you can't go there. So really, I wanted to know, is this something where she got Eitzah from someone, or is it something else?
No, I would say that this was much more guided by my mother's hashkafas that were deeply rooted within her from her upbringing in a very. The word Haredi did not exist in the 1950s, but my mother's father left the Czech Republic shortly before the war, and built a Torah lifestyle for himself and for a lot of his neighborhood in England, in London, setting up shuls, chadar, and mikvos. Like, he was a pioneer in setting up what we would now call mainstream Haredi society in the Hendon neighborhood, which is adjacent to Golders Green in London. And my mother was imbued with a deep sense and reverence for Yerushalayim, and definitely was decidedly not a member of, let's say, the B'nai Akiva community, which also existed in London. So,
you mentioned the B'nai Akiva community, and I come from a family where I hear such wonderful things about the B'nai Akiva community. That it was been Makari many people. Again, just everyone has their own sect in Yiddishkeit, their own mahalach things, and that's just not something which your mother was part of. It sounds like both sides of your family, there's similar yichus, and I was wondering, on your mother's side, is it also Hasidic yichus?
Oberland, which is somewhat of a either a mix or reflected a non-involvement when it came to matters of conflict between the community of Misnagdim and Hasidim. The Oberlander Jews of Czechoslovakia, particularly of Pressburg, and particularly the community that the Chassam Sofer instantiated, which my grandfather grew up in before he left for London, was a community of very, very devout Torah Jews that, while they were not Hasidic themselves, they revered Hasidic Rebbes. My grandfather's nighttime, bedtime stories that he would say to my mother were stories of the Barditchever, stories of the Apter Rav. These were people that devout Jews in Pressburg revered, and just a little glimpse into the culture of Pressburg. So everyone in Pressburg before the war would go to yeshiva, which was very different than the Lithuanian style of Judaism, where the elite would go to yeshivas like Volozhin. The Chassam Sofer recognized early on that the best defense against the burgeoning reform movement is to have everyone go to yeshiva, even folks that may not be Gemara all day long for the rest of their lives. Aptitude. And one of the things that really may have forced this was that the government in Czechoslovakia forced all the Jews to go to public school. So the Chassam Sofer said, okay, the kids will go to public school for like 3 to 4 hours a day in the afternoon, but they'll go to sleep early at night and they'll wake up at 4 in the morning and they'll all go to yeshiva. And for a few hours in the middle of the day, they'll have secular education, but then it'll be followed up with a night seder. And Marav will be at 9. They'll wake up at 4 again and repeat the cycle. So every Jewish boy, no matter what level of intellect they retained, were sent to yeshivas. And there's a story that I think I may have heard, I want to say Beryl Wine, but I could be very wrong, say about the Ksav Sofer, who I believe was the Chassam Sofer's son. They would wake up at 4 in the morning, they would go to the mikveh, it would be freezing cold, and as they would get out, they would towel off and be given a hot cup of coffee, and it would be this beautiful scene, this landscape behind the mikveh of the rolling hills and mountains of Pressburg. And the Ksav Sofer would often sit and refrain while blowing on his cup of coffee, like, with all of this, who needs Olam Haba? Like, there was such a geschmack for Yiddishkeit in Pressburg that the boys grew up with, that it was a fire that lit them for their entire lives. And my grandfather was a product of that.
All right, so when you say your grandfather, that's your mother's father. And you mentioned Pressburg. I'm going to look into Pressburg. We're going to read a little bit about it. But until we do, let's just go right there. Do you think perhaps the Novominsker would have had a more laid back, more of an accepting approach to Yeshiva Sakayets, the summer camp that's in Skokie Yeshiva, that's even partially run by Skokie Yeshiva, especially considering the fact that the Novominsker was actually a Rebbe in Skokie Yeshiva?
It is true that he was a Rebbe there. I don't know that he would have sent his own sons to Yeshiva Sakayets, but he had probably more of an American, so to say, worldview than, say, the maternal side of my family.
So another question I was wondering is when you were in 12th grade, so I know there was an enormous amount of pressure for you to go to Passaic Yeshiva. Where was that pressure coming from? Do you think did the Novominsker have a role in that, or was that something that was coming strictly from your mother's side?
So it's a synthesis of both. Meaning, when my mother told her father, my grandfather, that she was suggested to a young man who is a grandson of the previous Novominsker Rebbe, my mother's father was delighted, because while he wasn't Hasidish, he, like I said, revered Hasidim and revered Rebbes. And my mother clearly felt that marrying into a Rebbeisha family would supplement and be mamshach, so to say, her own religious aspirations. So going to Passaic was something that was more or less a demand from my mom, but it was definitely capstoned when I asked my uncle, should I go to Passaic or should I go to alternative yeshiva? And he advised me to go to Passaic.
Another question, like going back to the existentialist word, where we associated it with college, and I was wondering, so the Novominsker went to college, but it seems like the hadracha that he was giving you was to go off to really yeshivas. So do you think maybe he himself had chorata that he went to college? Maybe he wished he didn't go to college?
I don't think he regretted going to college, but I do think that he felt that the current generation of boys, in order to generate an army of B'nai Torah, college at best should be reserved till after marriage, after several years of learning during one's marriage.
All the Rebbeim that you've had, all the people that you've met, which Rebbe do you find is most inspiring? Which Rebbe is most inspiring to you?
I believe it would be really David Rosenbaum, my 12th grade Rebbe. He was he was by and large a very non-judgmental, kind, humble genius, who was I may have already used the adjective gentle, but that really, I think, is a defining characteristic of him. And when I read biographies of Rav Chaim Brisker and read about his gentleness and humility coupled with his absolute genius in developing an entire new framework for learning Gemara in depth, I think that that Rav Dover Rosenbaum is cut from that type of cloth. And it's no surprise to me that his son Meir is now the 11th grade Rebbe in Philadelphia Yeshiva. Like he grew up in such a home that could easily produce such an outcome.
Did you appreciate the Pilpul Shir that Rav David Rosenbaum gave?
I did. A lot of people said that it's out there. It's making all sorts of exegetical comparisons that aren't necessarily provable, but that was not his motivation. His motivation was to excite boys to feel the sweetness of learning, and he conveyed and that's where, in his opinion, and I would.
It looks like we got cut off. Thank you very much for. It's always very special when people dedicate time to on this podcast, and hopefully we'll be able to continue. Thank you very much. We've had, a number of people that we've really honored on this podcast over the past year. In fact, it really started during the summer of 2022 in July by a friend of mine, Menachem Menshel, by his chasana. That was really the first person that we really was really a cover. We really were like honoring the chassan and Kala and the chassan's family, and it wasn't put onto this particular podcast, but that's the first time that we had it. We had some others as well, Rav Kalman Weinreb when he was nifter, Rabbi Yosef Tendler when he was nifter. We had Rabbi Herber and Rabbi Pollack, and I believe there were some others as well. What we've never done is we've never honored someone, or honor, I don't know what honor is really the right word, but to take an interest in someone other than if the person already passed away, or if there was like a mitzvah to be mesamech the chassan nekala. The person we really should have chosen, and we will, is Rav David Rosenbaum, who's a 12th grade Rebbe. It's at the very end when I ask him this question of which Rebbe or person does he think was the most inspirational person to him in his life? And when he answers Rav David Rosenbaum, at that time it becomes apparent that even though everything he said about the Nava Minsker has tremendous value to it, and there's a lot of mamashas here, but I think there really has to be a follow-up where we ask him also more about Rav David Rosenbaum. We got disconnected at that time. I also think in the next episode, I'm just going to say a little bit more about him, not just my relationship, but really about him, the good traits, all of the wonderful midos that he has. Right now, I don't have a good microphone, so actually I can try to do it right now, but I don't know if people are going to hear me. There's just a lot of talent. There's a lot of talent when it comes to words, to be able to touch things up very well, to be able to take things which are almost experiences that are bigger than ourselves, and to be able to find just the right words to put it into. It's a true talent. I know at one point, I believe he was writing for a journal. This might have been such a long time ago. This might sound like Chinese to some people, but I really think it's in that area where There's tremendous talent, along with many other areas in humor as well, and it extends much further than that. If you've already listened to it, thank you very much, and I wish you a wonderful Shabbos. And if this happens to be in the beginning, please enjoy. Take care.